Welcome everyone to the Lubrizol CPVC webinar, Plumbing Codes and Approvals, What You Need to Know. Today, Lubrizol CPVC's Forrest Hampton will be discussing some important considerations when working with CPVC as a plumbing material and the relevant codes that dictate the use of CPVC in certain applications. My name is Olivia Mahalik. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, which will last between 20 and 30 minutes. We'll be taking some questions toward the end, which you can submit through the Q&A form below the slides in a text box near the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Presenting today will be Lubrizol's Forrest Hampton, the Codes and Approvals Manager for North America. Forrest has more than 10 years of experience researching and developing the components that are used in today's modern plumbing systems. He spent the first 17 years of his career as a chemist for some of the largest product manufacturers in the country, followed by several years specializing in plumbing codes and approvals. He joined Lubrizol in 2013. Before we get started, please turn off your pop-up blockers. If you have any questions or are having any technical difficulties, you can message us using the chat feature to the left side of your screen. And now, I'll hand it over to Forrest.
Hello everybody, my name is Forrest Hampton and I'm the Codes and Approval Manager for North America segment of Lubrizol CPVC. And this means that it's my job to know this stuff inside and out. As Olivia mentioned, I've spent most of my career in research and development as a chemist, and I've been with Lubrizol for a little over a year now. So we're going to go over why codes are critical in plumbing applications. So today we're going to go over the Uniform Plumbing Code, the International Plumbing Code, the Uniform Mechanical Code, the International Mechanical Code, as they relate to choosing CPVC as a plumbing material. They serve largely as a guide for localized jurisdictions, and they're an important part of every plumbing professional's job. All right, so now we're going to go over, so how does CPVC fit in? CPVC has been around for 30 years in plumbing applications. An increasing number of plumbers are choosing to use CPVC, and it's important to know how these codes affect this material. CPVC gained popularity because it offers plumbers and homeowners some benefits that metallic systems don't, including corrosion and biofilm resistance, lowered labor costs and installation time, quiet operation, and better hydraulic and insulating properties. Now, let's take a general look at some of the codes I mentioned earlier. The UPC and the UMC are developed by the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. The IPC and IMC are developed by the International Code Council. These are both model codes. They're available for local jurisdictions all over the world to draw from and to adopt into their own specific codes, modifying as necessary. As such, it's always important to check with the local jurisdiction when these codes are updated. It's important to know how they'll affect you. And it's also important that you always check to make sure what year of the code the local jurisdiction is following. The codes we're going to talk about today are the IPC and the IMC are the 2015 version, and the UPC and the UMC are the 2012 version, and the 2015 version is currently being worked on, and it will be published early next year. These codes are developed on a 3-year cycle. All right, in the IPC, so right now we're just going to go over the sections that call out where CPVC is allowed to be used in the codes. So in the IPC, the CPVC pipe and fittings are allowed for water service and distribution applications per 605.3, 605.4, and 605.5. And then in section 504.6, it is allowed for use for discharge piping serving temperature and pressure relief valves. Now in the UPC, CPVC pipe and fittings are allowed for water service and distribution applications per 604.1, and in And in section 608.5, CPVC is allowed for use in temperature and pressure relief valve drain tubes. And the reason that we're going over both codes is the fact that they are very similar in the way that they're written, but as you can see, there's going to be different sections that are called out that'll call out the specific area that allows you to use CPVC, and then the wording will be a little bit different. As you know, in the UMC it calls out that it's temperature and pressure relief valve drain tubes, and in the IPC it's discharge piping. So, and those are the reasons why I'm going over each specific section so that you guys can reference those in the future. So for the 2015 IPC code, it was published earlier this year. There was one update that I wanted to mention to everybody, and that was that CPVC aluminum CPVC pipe was added for water service and distribution pipe. And this is the FlowGuard Gold multi-layer piping. All right, now we'll move on to the mechanical codes and talk about where they are relevant in the codes. So CPVC pipe and fittings are allowed in the IMC for hydronic applications per section 1202.4 and 1202.5. For the UMC, it's allowed for hydronic applications per 1201.3.1. And for the updates to the 2015 IMC code, the CPVC pipe and fittings are allowed for use for ground source heat pump loop piping. And this becomes important for the material as geothermal heat pumps becomes more popular, sustainable method for heating different occupancies. So now we're going to go over solvent welding and how that fits into the system and where that's called out in the codes. Solvent welding process for joining CPVC pipe and fittings offers some big benefits. It's quicker and cleaner than fitting metallic pipe together and can drastically cut down on installation time. As such, the major codes cover solvent welding thoroughly. Each code has a slightly different wording, but in the end, the results are the same. For two-step solvent cementing, where the instructions require that primer be used, the solvent cement must be orange in color and conform to ASTM F493. The UPC requires that the primer be colored and manufactured in accordance with ASTM F656. For one-step solvent cement, the directions must allow for it to be used without primer, must be yellow in color, conform to ASTM F493, and the joint shall be made in accordance with ASTM D2846 and F493. This basically limits the pipe diameter for one-step solvent cementing to CTS 1.5 to 2 inch pipe. So those are all the sections that go over where CPVC is used in the model codes. Now we're going to talk about some of the issues that are brought up day to day when people are using CPVC and some of the questions they have. One of the questions that we're most often asked is how does the sizing requirements work for CPVC? And the good news is CPVC pipe sizing is directly comparable to copper tube sizing for 1/2 inch to 2 inch CPVC. So, and the half-inch to 2-inch CPVC CTS pipe conforms to SDR11, and many of the CPVC products are fully compatible with CTS, solvent, welded fittings, and transition adapters. The second most asked question is about combustibility. And so it's always important to choose building products that aren't contributing to a greater risk of fire, and the codes account for this. So we're going to switch gears for a minute, and we're going to talk about the International Building Code, or the IBC. The IBC is developed through the International Code Council, just like the IPC and the IMC. The IBC has been widely adopted through the United States, and the ICC is the only one who has a building code now. IATMO used to write a building code, but they no longer write one. So the 2015 IBC states that the use of combustible piping materials shall be permitted where installed in accordance with limitations of the IMC and the IPC. So basically, that's just saying that all plastic piping can be used in buildings as long as they follow the mechanical and the plumbing codes. So, and another big issue is use in plenums. So the IBC accounts for flammability in plenum areas as well. When CPVC piping, I apologize, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we'll talk about piping penetrating firewalls first, and then we'll talk about plenums. So when CPVC piping penetrates a fire-rated wall, it must be used with a listed fire stop material. The fire stop material holds the listing for the type of construction and the material penetrating the firewall or assembly. So a lot of times we get asked for our listing for penetrating fire-rated walls, and the piping's not listed. The fire stop that protects that opening is what holds the listing to make sure that it can stop the fire from penetrating that wall. So in the code state that the fire stop used must be tested in accordance with ASTM E814 or UL 1479 with a minimum positive pressure differential of 0.01 inch of water and shall have an F rating of not less than the required fire resistant rating of the wall itself that is being penetrated. So now we'll move on to plenums. So for plenums, it's common in many commercial buildings that the area directly above a suspended ceiling is used as a return air plenum. Both the IMC and the UMC account for this and state within the code that the materials within these spaces be non-combustible. Now, there is a special consideration in this part of the code. Per the 2015 IMC, piping used in plenum spaces must be non-combustible or must be listed and labeled as having a flame spread index of no more than 25 and a smoke developed index of no more than 50 when tested in accordance with ASTM E84 or UL 723. Now, within the 2012 UMC, the CPVC can be used within the plenum if it maintains those same properties. So the flame spread and the smoke development is going to be 2550. The 2012 version of the UMC does not require that the product be listed and labeled, but it's expected that the 2015 version will. And for listed and labeled for the plenum applications, it's important because historically CPVC systems have been allowed to be used in the plenum space based on test reports showing CPVC pipe and fittings meeting the 2550 flame spread smoke development rating when tested in general accordance with ASTM E84. So in the past, we would just present data from a third-party lab, and the jurisdictions would accept that CPVC could be used within a plenum. But now, since the code has changed, a third-party listing needs to be used to show that the pipe, is needed to show that the pipe is certified to be used in a plenum space because it's passed the required testing to be in that space. And what you'll see in the field is that the pipe will be listed or will be labeled on the pipe with their listing. And for fittings, they're usually space constrained, and the listings will show on the packaging of the literature. And just for reference, when they're doing the E84 test, that they use an asbestos cement panel as the 0 rating, and then they use red oak as the 100 rating. Say, engineers specifying the material can have peace of mind in the anticipated performance of the piping, and the building should enjoy a long-lasting and an efficient plumbing solution. All right, putting it all together. So you've seen throughout the webinar there are a lot of interconnected codes and standards to be mindful of. It's a complex aspect of the plumbing industry, but it's important to stay up to speed on how these things can affect your work. If you're in doubt about any of this, it's important to seek out some experts who can help you understand. Lubrizol CPVC is always more than happy to assist in guiding you through some of these concerns. And if you have any further questions beyond what I've covered here today, you can reach me via my email at forrest.hampton@lubrizol.com.
Thank you, Forrest. As Forrest mentioned, Lubrizol CPVC is always open and willing to answer any of your concerns as they pertain to codes. So please get in touch with us if you have a particular issue, and we'll do our best to help. In addition, we're in the process of developing an in-depth white paper that encompasses much of this information we've discussed throughout this webinar, which we will be sending to you in the weeks following this webinar. You can also learn more about Lubrizol CPVC piping, particularly FlowGuard Gold, at lubrizolcpvc.com. And now we're going to open the webinar to some questions. The first question that came in, Forrest, is can you recommend any particular one-step solvent cement?
There's not a particular one-step solvent cement that I would recommend. I would recommend going to the solvent cement manufacturers because it needs to state on their instructions that it's for use without primer. But two of the biggest manufacturers, and they both have it. One would be Odie. You can go to www.odie.com, or you could go to IPS, and that's www.ipscorp.com, and look up solvent, CPVC one-step solvent cement.
Great. The next question that came in is, do you have any recommended fire caulks, and how do I know if the product I'm using is compatible with CPVC?
All right, so for compatibility questions, the easiest thing to do is if you go to www.fbcsystemcompatible.com, and that'll bring you to the Lubrizol website that talks about compatibility, and you can look up different products there. Then it'll tell you which products are compatible with CPVC. And these products are all third-party tested to show that they have compatibility with CPVC. And then there's also on this website, there's incompatible products, so they're incompatible products that have caused issues in the field, so that you know when you're installing the systems, you want to make sure you stay away from those. And then there's also an other compatibility topics, which helps you out with things that aren't necessarily on either of the other two lists.
Great. Another question is, where can I find the most up-to-date versions of these codes for my own reference?
The codes can be found in a number of places. There's a bunch of different sites that sell standards and codes, but the easiest thing to do is if you're looking for the uniform plumbing code or the uniform mechanical code, you can go to www.iapmo.com, so that's IAPMO. And then if you're looking for the IPC or the IMC, you can go to www.iccsafe.com, and they both have stores where you can purchase these materials. But the thing that you want to make sure that you always do is you want to check with your local jurisdiction and make sure you know what version of the code that they're following, so that you make sure you're looking at the right document.
Okay, one more question. Some of these codes mention that pipes must adhere to ASTM standards. What is the relevance of ASTM standards within these codes?
Well, ASTM standards are consensus standards that are written by the manufacturers, the users, and other interested groups for what the minimum requirements are for those products to meet the certain standards. So if there weren't ASTM standards, then the code would have to call out that the pipe has to have certain pressure ratings and all these things, so it's easier. The code can reference the ASTM, and the ASTM covers what the material requirements are and then what the physical requirements are of the pipe and then what it's allowed to be used in.
Great. Well, this concludes our question and answer. If you have any additional questions that did not get answered, you can use the feature below the presentation, and we will get to those questions and follow up with you via email. So thank you for your time today, and have a great afternoon.